Hi everyone, this is Dr. Heather Austin Robillard, and as you've learned, there are certain populations where eating disorders are at a higher risk. Another population that research has been found to have higher incidence of eating disorders is among the LGBTQ plus population. In this lecture video, we will learn about some of the theories behind why this population has an increase in eating disorders, the symptomology and prevalence rates, and issues for treatment. Before we talk about eating disorders among the LGBTQ plus population, let's go ahead and define some of the terminology used here. If you're not already familiar with, LGBTQ plus stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning, and then other. Also considered in this group are intersex, pansexual, and asexual. This group is primarily composed of minority gender and sexual identities. Often transgender is grouped here, but transgender is not a sexual orientation. Some other things you might see through the readings and through the lecture videos are SM, which stands for sexual minority, and GM, which stands for gender minority. Sexual minorities are those lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, whereas gender minorities might be those transgender, non-binary. One of the greatest threats to the health of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender plus Americans is the lack of scientific information about their health and their mental health. Some of the empirical data that we do have in this community is the minority stress model by Meyer. This hypothesizes that minority individuals experience more stressors, making them more susceptible to developing certain health issues. Minority stress can include prejudice, stigma, discrimination, rejection, lack of family support, and sometimes even internalized stigma or like internalized homophobia, something like that. Early research has found that internalization of homophobia is linked to disordered eating and poor body image among gay and bisexual men. Some of the risk factors for mental health concerns among the LGBTQ plus population include fear and stress related to the coming out process. Maybe they fear being rejected by their family and friends. Internalized negative thoughts and beliefs about being a minority gender or sexual orientation group. Heteronormativity among their peers and careers and academics. Being exposed to violence just for being gay or even bullying because of their sexual minority status. Living up to the expectations of specific body image within the LGBTQ community. They may experience unsafe home environments or even be homeless. Up to 42% of homeless children are estimated to identify in the LGBTQ community. Body image ideals expressed within this community, cultural context communities can also increase risk factors for mental health concerns and eating disorders. When it comes to prevalence rates among the LGBTQ plus population and eating disorders, research has shown that a person who identifies as part of this community has a higher risk of bulimia than someone who identifies as heterosexual. Research reveals that no significant differences in prevalence among lesbian, bisexual, and heterosexual women in relation to eating disorders. Gay men are more likely to report some sort of distorted body image compared to those who are heterosexual males. Gay men are also 5% of the population, but they make up 42% of the population of men who have eating disorders. Research culminates that gay men are 7 times more likely to binge and 12 times more likely to purge than heterosexual men. So let's take a look at men and body image. Body image disturbance in men is found that men's bodies are depicted in the media as being tall, muscular, mesomorphic, and broader shoulders with an upper defined body but a flat stomach and narrow hips. There is a desire to present as masculine, desire to look a certain way to attract the right partner. And there's obvious some social comparisons between the men and the media. When it comes to gay and bisexual men within body image, Initial research finds that gay and bisexual men and body dissatisfaction include gay men more so than heterosexual men are less satisfied with their body and they desire to be thinner. There is also the objectification theory and body ideal internalization theory. Objectification theory proposes that repeated exposure to sexually objectifying experiences and the broader societal reinforcement of such practices leads to young girls and women to internalize these messages, learning to view their bodies from the external observer's perspective and to conceptualize their bodies as objects to be scrutinized by others. When it comes to this self-objectification, it is theorized as a risk factor for disordered eating. Gay men are particularly at risk for heightened social comparison, one, to be accepted within the gay community, and two, to reduce the potential impact of homophobia. This is a chart that identifies what body image looks like for some gay men. There is a muscle paradigm, a thin paradigm, and a healthy paradigm. They strive to be muscular and masculine, but they also strive to be lean yet youthful, and they strive to be the picture of health rather than those as seen as HIV positive. In body image with lesbian and bisexual women, there are some inconsistencies in the research with whether they have more or less body dissatisfaction than heterosexual women. All groups reported similar pressures from society and media in order to be thin or thinner. Some of the critique on the existing research reveals that there are sampling issues related to the average BMI of the participants. There's population issues like control sample from university, lesbian participants from the community, that kind of thing. There's also methodological issues on how body dissatisfaction is measured among this community. Owens et al. In 2003 used a matched sample and found that lesbian participants reported greater body satisfaction than those of heterosexual women. While there is some research that supports that lesbian and bisexual women do not differ more than heterosexual women, we do know that there is some research that have higher levels of body dissatisfaction. Some of the theories regarding the conflicting evidence among body dissatisfaction in lesbian and bisexual women include that there are some protective and risk factors in this community. Some protective factors include cultural norms and attitudes within the lesbian community that de-emphasize physical attractiveness and promote larger body size standards, whereas the risk factor include those minority-specific stressors like violence and discrimination that we discussed. There's also the femininity hypothesis. Femininity hypothesis is a theory that asserts that the more the individual identifies with feminine traits, the more they are at risk for health-related problems among women, like eating disorders. So lesbian and bisexual women who endorse feminine traits report more disordered eating than those who endorse more androgynous or masculine traits. When it comes to the feminist perspectives on why this might be happening, it is posited that because both lesbian and obese women break patriarchal cultural views intended to keep women powerless and prevent them from loving and valuing themselves, if a lesbian woman is able to work through the stigma surrounding her sexual identity, she is less likely to follow societal rules of size, shape, and attractiveness. It is asserted that society holds lesbian women to the same attractiveness standards as heterosexual women, especially in the workplace, where women must market themselves based on appearance. Transgender is a discomfort with one's biological sex or a sense of inappropriateness in the gender role of that sex. Cisgender is an individual whose gender identity matches their biological sex assigned at birth. Gender identity disorder, or GID, is a strong and persistent cross-gender identification and discomfort with one's biological sex. Gender dysphoria focuses on the distress of the incongruity between biological sex and gender identity. This distress is likely due to society that stigmatizes minority genders. Transgender individuals have certain risk factors that might increase their eating disorder symptomology. One being that they face higher rates of discrimination. Discrimination is highly associated with poor mental outcomes. And when we talk about body dissatisfaction, this is a core feature of the distress that a trans individual feels and experiences. Research on body dissatisfaction and the trans community has centered around sex-specific body parts. Body dissatisfaction is suggested to play a prominent role in gender dysphoria. Body dissatisfaction is also a central aspect of disordered eating. Several initial studies suggest that individuals who identify as transgendered may engage in disordered eating behaviors to suppress features of their biological gender or extenuate features of their gender identity. In one study, trans women showed higher scores on restrained eating, eating concerns, weight concerns, shape concerns, drive for thinness, bulimia, body dissatisfaction, and body checking compared to male controls. Trans men displayed a higher degree of restrained eating, weight concerns, shape concerns, body dissatisfaction, and body checking compared to male controls. Research proposes that trans women are influenced by the same cultural socialization of cisgender women, pro-thin, anti-fat, which can disrupt eating behaviors and body image. Some other research has explored changes in eating disorders over time during the course of physical treatments, such as SRS, for gender reassignment. Let's take a look at some of the perceived causes of disordered eating in the trans community. These are some specific quotes from some trans individuals in a research study. One being that they suppress their gender. The background of the crazy weight loss was that the curves would disappear. They have always felt disgusting. For example, my hips and my breasts. I felt like I wanted to diet my gender away completely or dispel it altogether. I still feel like sometimes that I have to diet because otherwise I'll start looking like a woman again. Weight gain would have brought forth my feminine figure, which was disgusting to me. Or they're using it to extenuate their gender. I thought that because I was a woman, I had to look good, to look more like a model. I just felt a lot of pressure to be thin all the time. I wanted to be smaller, more delicate. In my opinion, it is connected to being a woman. In general, women are more slender than men. It's easier to make a man's body look feminine if you're a bit thinner. Then, of course, there are other reasons. I have always wanted to feel that I can control my body. The self-control was rewarding. Somehow I suppose it's a typical anorexic feature. With everything that we've discussed in this lecture video, it's important to identify some of the treatment concerns that can happen in the LGBTQ plus community when they're struggling with an eating disorder. We know that there's a lack of culturally competent treatment. There's a lack of systems that support and aid in the successful recovery within this community. There's also a lack of research on eating disorders in the LGBTQ plus community, which translates to a lack of informed information disseminated to those LGBTQ plus resource centers. Although the community resources for LGBTQ community has grown greatly, there is still a lack of specific services that target eating disorder issues. In order to move forward, we need to stop treating the LGBTQ community as one group in research. This prevents research from identifying unique characteristics among the distinct groups, e.g., for example, gay males are more likely to have an eating disorder than trans males. With the trans community, participants are often recruited that had conflicted gender identity, as well as individuals who wholly identify as transgender, those who do not select physical treatments for gender reassignment. Overall, more extensive research needs to be conducted among this population. I hope you've enjoyed this video lecture.